But what I wanted to do in terms of how we break down the official visits, because there are 18, and I want to mention everyone, but I don't think that we can get into the details of every single recruitment, and it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to. I kind of wanted to tier each of the, like, have different categories or tiers for the various 18 so that you can kind of contextualize who's in what category and how should I be viewing each of these players going into these weekends, because not everyone's in the same situation. Some guys are coming into this weekend knowing that they're going to be committing to Georgia. Some guys, let's just use the last visit weekend as an example, May 16th to May 18th. There were people like Ryan Mosley who were coming into the weekend knowing I'm going to be a Georgia Bulldog. I've already let them know that. It's only a matter of time. It's just how does it end up playing out? Then there are other players where they're not as likely to be ending up at Georgia for one reason or another. Their choice, Georgia's choice, position fit, numbers game, whatever that looks like. And then there's players like Shadarius Tootle where they're committed to another program coming into the weekend. It's kind of hard to say definitively they're favoring Georgia or not favoring Georgia when they're committed elsewhere before they've come on that official visit. And so I think there's a lot of similarities between that weekend and this one. So the first category that we're going with, Jordan, are the people that I'm calling the dogs. The people that I think, as we sit here right now, Georgia should be feeling pretty good about where they're positioned for them coming into the weekend. And I would be surprised when we're debriefing next week if we're having many different conversations. The only different conversations I could envision is if they just had a hankering to lock down their recruitment. And if that's the case, we might be talking about them at the start of an episode when it comes to committing. So obviously we've got Jordan Smith. He's the safety from Houston County, already committed to Georgia. Don't need to elaborate much further there. I even thought there was a possibility he would change his official visit weekend because so many of the commits are coming that June 13th weekend, and his high school teammate Kayvon Conciaro is the last weekend of June. I thought there was a chance he might move to that, but much like Ryan Mosley, I think you'll probably see Jordan Smith pop up at multiple official visit weekends, even if it's as an unofficial visitor. Carter Lucky, defensive lineman from Norcross, younger brother of Lawson Lucky. I think it's only a matter of time with that one. He's got official visits scheduled to Ohio State and Florida State, but it's hard to come up with a world where Carter Lucky is not in Georgia's class. Craig Dandridge is a wide receiver from Cambridge High School that recently adjusted his official visit schedule. He was supposed to be going to Clemson this weekend. Clemson's full. They've taken all three wide receivers that they're going to take. I think that says a lot about how Clemson probably feels about their wide receiver class, that they are kind of saying thanks but no thanks to a few really talented wide receivers, but their number was 3 at wide receiver, and there was a chance that it was going to be 4 for a couple of guys that are actually going to be at Georgia this weekend, Craig Dandridge being one of them. But I feel as good as ever about where Georgia sits with Craig Dandridge, and the fact that when he no longer was visiting Clemson, he ended up putting Georgia at this important early weekend for him, I think says a lot. And then Kamari Brooks, he's an edge rusher from outside linebacker, jack linebacker, however you want to characterize it, from North Oconee High School. If you're listening to this on Thursday or watching it on Thursday, depending on what time, there's an article at Dawgs 24/7 that you can check out more in depth with Kamari Brooks. But he's another one that's still a Georgia-Alabama battle, but I really like where Georgia sits with it. Jordan, is there anyone that surprised you to see on this list, or that maybe you thought would be on this list that we'll have in a different category?
Well, I'll just start here. Ben, do you think that Georgia was intentional in just going through the Team Jordan of the predicted commits? Because if I'm not mistaken, did I have each of those guys?
Yeah, now that I think about it, I guess I didn't realize that all 4 of those are your predicted commit squad, huh?
I will say I'm very interested to hear what we hear from Kamari Brooks after this, just because to me, sort of reading the tea leaves, I kind of feel like of those guys that you mentioned, his recruitment at this point may be the most competitive. It sort of seems like Alabama and Georgia are really pushing for it. Being more of a local guy, maybe that helps Georgia. But his is the one that I want to sort of hear what he has to say afterwards, what he says about Chidera Uzodiribe, what his feel was of this visit, because I think on the whole, Georgia should feel pretty good about that group you just named. But if you told me one of these guys gets away, Kamari Brooks would be the guy that I would say out of that group. So this is a very big visit weekend.
No, I think that's fair. And, where I think Georgia's done a great job there is Georgia's only taken, very likely, I shouldn't say is only, but very likely only taking one at that spot. One based on who they took last cycle and in the portal. Also, when you look ahead to the 2027 class and what's possible for Georgia at that position in state, I think it's going to be minimal in numbers. And I think that Georgia has identified Kamari Brooks as the guy that it wants to bring in at that spot in that class. And I think that in talking with Kamari Brooks earlier this week about it, he feels that very much. Not to say that he doesn't feel love or prioritization at Bama, and that's why Bama is very much still in this thing, thanks to former Georgia linebacker Christian Robinson really keeping him in it. But this is one that Georgia, I think, really wants, and I think that Georgia has made clear he is their guy at that spot in this cycle.